Hello and welcome to this webinar on the New Zealand timber market. Today we're going to be discussing and analyzing how the market works and how it competes globally. And as you can guess and see on the screen, today's guest is Mr. David Turner from the highly esteemed SEQUAL Lumber. Truly, in my opinion, one of the world's foremost sawmills, and also not only in the world, but also in New Zealand. And with that said, I would like to warmly welcome today's guest, Mr. David Turner. Hello, David. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. So where in the world are you based?
So our head office is in Tauranga in New Zealand, which is 2 hours south of Auckland, for those of you who don't know New Zealand. And our factory is in Kawerau, which is another hour southeast of where we're based here.
Okay. And you are the CEO of SEQUAL Lumber, but for those that maybe haven't been very active in New Zealand or been to your part of the world, can you tell us more about SEQUAL? What do you produce, how much, and which markets do you primarily work with?
Sure. So SEQUAL was set up by myself and 4 friends. None of us had any knowledge of the wood processing sector. I was a banker and my friends were farmers and kiwi fruit growers. But what we shared was a passion to add value to our raw materials. So we fundamentally believe that businesses exist, obviously, to make a profit, but equally to make a contribution to the communities they're in. And the only way we can really do that is by adding value to the raw materials we have. So we could see that there was a significant amount of wood supply available in New Zealand, but there was a real lack of processing investment. So we wanted to have a crack at seeing whether we could make it work. So we started the business in 2008, and today this year we'll process 300,000 cubes out, and that'll be exported. 75% will be exported, 25% will be used domestically. And our exports are quite broad in terms of the range of countries that they go to, but primarily we're focused on Asia and IMENA.
Okay, interesting. And the products that you do produce, is it only sawn timber or also different kinds of value-added products?
Sawn timber only. So sawn or dried. So that's the extent of what we believe is the extent of our process advantage here is primary processing and drying. And beyond that point, we think secondary processing is better done in country.
Jumping into the topic of forestry in New Zealand, overall in sawmilling in New Zealand, the production capacity in New Zealand has stayed relatively stable around 4 or 4.5 million cubic meters every year over the last 10 or 20 years or so. But it hasn't increased very much despite a growing plantation resource. Why is this in your opinion?
Well, it's really a case study which celebrates the triumph of ideology above outcomes. And so my view is that the New Zealand manufacturing sector operates in an environment of policy disadvantage. And what that's seen is progressively, if you look at New Zealand's exports, they've declined in complexity across a broad range of market segments. And wood processing is probably the worst example of that, where whilst we increasingly export larger and larger amounts of logs, I think we're the biggest log exporter in the world, our own domestic processing base has been significantly impacted by the environment of policy disadvantage that we operate within.
What are some examples of those policy disadvantages?
Every other government in the world is investing to make sure that their people are given the opportunity to add value to products. So they want to increase the amount of raw materials they import to give people a job and give them the opportunity to create value. New Zealand believes that that there's a free market, and that the reason why we don't export more value-add goods is because it's more competitive to process those goods in other countries. But in reality, there's just a range of benefits that those other countries give their manufacturers to enable them to grow. So the worst case for us is obviously the exportation of logs to China. So the government commissioned a study which was released in the beginning of 2019, which looked at the level of distortions in the log market, and it showed a level of distortion with the trade of logs into China that they'd never seen before. And what's driving that distortion is a number of policies that China employs to promote raw material importation at the expense of value-added goods, but equally the policies that other countries employ to limit the ability for raw materials to be exported from their country. The obvious one being Russia's total log ban in January 2022. So increasingly, China is having fewer and fewer countries that they can import logs from in their raw form. So that's had a real negative effect on the New Zealand market. And so when you look at manufacturing in New Zealand, you really need to look at it through the guise of the different log types that we have here, because it's not just one market. So if we take the structural market, which is for the domestic framing, that what you're seeing is a concentration of an investment in processing, and we have a couple of really high caliber sawmills that are really capable of supplying the domestic market. The problem that they have is our structural wood is not exportable because our stress grade rating is too low relative to global standards. So a real obvious opportunity for New Zealand would be to export framing timber to Australia, but the standards in Australia prevent them from buying our framing timber. So they import a significant amount of framing from Europe as a consequence. So the framing market is really limited by the species availability and global standards. The prune market, which is really focused, it's where you get the clear grade from. And so they supply high value applications like in Europe, Kibini and Akoya, those chemical hardening companies. And so that market has tremendous potential, but because of distortions in the underlying log price, the cost to prune doesn't justify the return on the log for the forest owner. So we're seeing a movement away from pruning. So the availability of pruned log is diminishing. So there's no real point to see investment in prune mills because there's a lack of security around the future. So what we have a lot of is this utility or saw log that gets exported to China, and that's the place where we play. So we buy that log, and we're trying to create products for markets globally and domestically that can turn that fiber into a high value product.
Super interesting. It's always very interesting to hear what are the dynamics in each unique producing market around the world. And moving on, I'd like to ask you, what are the challenges in producing logs from radiata pine, but what are also the opportunities in the end markets for it?
So radiata logs are a great log to process. Really easy for handling. And so I don't see any real challenges in terms of the processing of a radiata log. The only issue we have is this issue of distortion. But the opportunities and the benefits of radiata pine are over and above other species. Look, it's a mid-density fiber. It's not great, but it's fast growth fiber. So there is an element of sequestration optimization that you can get from this faster growth fiber if we operate in a rotation that turns that into a product. And I think that from a framing perspective, the stiffness that we achieve is suitable for building. We have buildings, obviously all through New Zealand, they're not falling down. So I think the grade standard over time creates an opportunity if we could address that grade standard, because we've got a track record of being able to utilize radiata in construction applications. And it's a great product for treatment. So I think more than any other product, it's any other species in the world, it fully absorbs any treatment. And so that's a real advantage for radiata, is the ability to treat it. One of our customers builds a lot of buildings, a lot of resorts out of radiata pine. And the reason he chooses radiata as a species is it's the only one that he believes he can get full penetration treatment. And so he gets a lot of confidence around utilizing wood in some quite harsh environments. And then its durability and its machinability. You know, it's a great species to work with, and it can be easily defected and finger jointed and glued, and it can be nailed. You know, it responds really well to utilization. So for me, if you look at the fiber itself, it's a really average fiber, and people often get caught up in the fact that the fiber itself is not as good as what you have in Europe. It's not as good as what you have in North America in these slower growing environments, but it's suitable for a lot of different things. And if you look at it in the context of being able to sequester more carbon out of our atmosphere, then I think there's a real opportunity globally for us to be thinking about moving to faster growth species, and then using a machining process to turn it into a product.
Super interesting. What about the opportunities for it in end markets when you are delivering to markets that import from different destinations? How do maybe Middle East construction, pallet, or furniture manufacturers see radiata?
I think positively, you know, and they will, for all the reasons I've raised. But I would say that their number one criticism is not so much about the species, it's about New Zealand businesses operating in their country. I think they see us as quite fickle. We come into the market, then we leave when the prices drop. You know, they don't see us as historically a long-term partner. And so that's really something that we've tried to address at SEQUAL is, when we go into a market, we stay in a market, and we're trying to build long-term relationships that are meaningful with our customers in all of these markets that we play in.
Okay. And you mentioned some of the disadvantages, policy disadvantages in New Zealand. But what, in your opinion, what are the advantages in sawmilling in New Zealand?
That's a good question. Look, you're in New Zealand, so you know it's a great place to work and operate. And you know, up until recently, we had a pretty effective rule of law. So it's a good place to do business without a doubt. We have a large availability of fiber, which is far in excess of our ability to consume domestically. And I think that the issues that I've alerted you to around policy disadvantage, it's now very much understood. The government understands now that the reason why we've got underinvestment in wood processing isn't because we're inefficient, it's just because of policy settings. But the challenge for governments is, how do you address that, and how do you change that in a way which is consistent with international obligations? So now we're seeing a really big push in New Zealand to decarbonize, and a movement towards circular economy. And you know, like many countries around the world, we're committed to zero carbon 2050 and the Paris Accord 2030. And we see wood processing at the center of New Zealand's decarbonisation. So the opportunities to invest today are really significant, we believe. And that's driven by the transition to more and more low carbon construction domestically and abroad. So, you know, the rise of high level CLT buildings and glulam, and the understanding that consumers of the future care about your carbon footprint, and say, well, how does your product perform when you assess it against a carbon matrix? And we're seeing a significant drive around residues. So residues play a key role now into assisting New Zealand move to biofuels and biomass, to move away from coal and fossil fuels. So I think there's a lot of opportunity today in New Zealand as we decarbonize, because wood processing is the center of that decarbonisation process.
Okay. And talking about the actual output of New Zealand sawmills, what are the standard dimensions and lengths?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if you were talking to a structural mill, it would be your traditional inch market. So I think, you know, your 100 by 50, 150 by 50, and all of that, 200 by 50, 250 by 50. Its finished length is 90 by 45, and that's the traditional framing product. and then your prune guys are all your traditional inch-based markets, your cuttings grades. Your lengths are traditionally 6 meter, 5'4" and 4'8", and anything shorter than that in the trim. But our point of difference is actually we don't have a traditional size, so we cut whatever a customer wants. So we cut hundreds and hundreds of different sizes to suit the needs of the customer. And that's SEQUAL's key point of difference.
Okay, super interesting. And about the sawmilling industry in New Zealand, how is it divided, or how fragmented is it? Is there a consolidation, would you say?
No, I would say that it's been in decline. So, we've had significant amount of sawmill closures and general underinvestment in sawmilling over the last 15 years. But there are obviously pockets of opportunity that have come within that. So in the domestic framing market, there's been significant investment, and I think we've got world-class sawmills to support that market. I think there's one sawmill in particular, Panpac, which has invested heavily to be able to grow the prune market, and it's done a great job in the US and in China, delivering high-grade wood. But generally, you would say there's just an element of frustration, if anything, in the New Zealand environment around the lack of investment and our inability to build global brands in wood processing.
And moving on to the next step in the supply chain, what about the actual exports of New Zealand? I've read that it's around 2 million cubic meters, so that would be around 50% of the production. Is that still the case? And if so, what are the key markets?
So I think they've declined a little bit since that number, particularly into China. But it's pretty broad based. So what I would say is that the structural guys, they export their fall down product. So it's exported as a waste stream effectively. Your prune mills are really focused on Europe, North America, and Australia, and it's for high value applications. I think in my market, which is the utility grade market, we've been growing quite a lot in that space actually. And I see a tremendous amount of opportunity to keep growing. But you just have to think differently. So at this stage, we're really focused just on that Asia and Middle East market.
Are there any parts of Asia and Middle East which you are especially focused on?
Not especially. I would say that Japan and Korea have been two markets that we've consistently supplied forever, and we've got good, strong relationships there. We have a sales office in China, but we've found we've contracted into China over the last 2 years to a point where it's only 1% of our sales now. We're really focused on Southeast Asia. I think Vietnam, Malaysia, and Singapore, Thailand, those areas have really good opportunities for utilization of radiata. And in the Middle East, I think we're in India. I think India is a great opportunity. I think Saudi and Oman and Dubai are all good opportunities. And we really, over the long term, we really think that Africa and North Africa is going to continue to be a growth market. So we want to invest there now, really just in brand building, building awareness, so that as that market grows, we can grow with them.
I've always argued that it's extremely important for not only sellers, but also buyers to have a really agile supply chain. Because especially in this industry, David, as you know, the markets are so volatile and there's so little transparency. So you really got to have a pulse on all the different markets so that you can adjust it quite quickly, which can be critical. And the sawmills, which are slow to do that, they really suffer in the long term.
I completely agree with you. But it's the balance is that you can never be seen to be leaving a market. So I'm a big believer in agility, and our whole business is predicated on that. But you never want to get out of a market. So I can understand there are times when you've got to reduce your supply, whether it's the price point or demand's insufficient, but you always want a presence. And I think that's been one of the key principles that's underpinned our growth.
That's a very good point, because also if you then leave the market, then you won't be there to feel when it's turning on the way up back again.
And you've got to rebuild that network, and that's not easy, as you know. I just think you've got strong relationships, you invest in these relationships. The idea of leaving a market because the price point doesn't work today it just doesn't work for me. So there are long periods of time where you can be in a market and it's costing you money to be there, but it's the price you pay to be there in the good time.
Absolutely. And on the topic of export markets and particularly logs, you are buying logs locally, but
Yes.
You and maybe your competitors or the harvesters are exporting logs.
Mhm.
So what is the export price parity for logs leaving the country versus those that are consumed and purchased by sawmills?
So we get set each month, or depending on the contract, each month or each quarter, against the exact same price that the export market's set at. So we pay the same price for our logs as China pays for theirs on a distribution adjusted basis.
And what does that mean?
It means we have high volatility in our prices, and we've had to suffer quite significant. Well, we have the highest log price in the world, I believe, or pretty close to it. Russ Taylor will verify that if he's listening. But one of the highest log prices in the world, and it's not the highest quality log in the world.
I spoke to Russ actually yesterday.
Okay.
So he is not attending because it's 1 a.m. in Vancouver. It's extremely hard to find a workable time for all of you, but he does send his regards, absolutely.
That's good.
So on the topic of sawn timber exports, you mentioned that your key markets are Asia and MENA, where other big producers are active, especially, for example, Russia, Central Europe, the Nordics, and so on. So how do you compete and stay unique and stay competitive in such markets where there are multiple market players with all kinds of qualities and fibers and species?
Yeah. So I think the starting point is you have to be able to you have to present a market price. So you've got to be competitive, and you've got to have process competitiveness, and that's a function of the cost of processing, but also your supply chain. So we think a lot about that. I think we're a really low cost producer, and that enables us to ensure we can compete no matter what the market price is doing. We're very much a price taker in terms of the market price for lumber. We invest a lot in optimizing our supply chain to minimize waste through there. And so, that's really important to us. And then I think we try really hard to have a customer experience that's different. And we're really thinking about that now, is how do we, it's one thing to have great relationships, but how can we use customer experience as an advantage? And I think that there's something that can be unique for sawmills, because a lot of sawmills are still quite traditional. And then our other piece is around mass customization. So the hallmark of our business strategy and what's enabled us to succeed and grow is our mass customization business model. So if you think about sawmilling globally, it's really a mass standardized mindset, whether it's all driven by what does my product, minimize the product stream and set up the sawmill to be able to push it through at the maximum recovery as fast as possible. What that does is it just amplifies inventory cycles, and it means that you have, stock, and then you sell down your stock and you got waste. So it's a production-led model. We are really focused on being a customer-led model. And what that means is that we only cut what we have an order for. We have no standard sizes. And so every day we're doing something completely different for a different market. And even within every log, we're cutting for multiple geographies, products, market segments, and we're minimizing the waste of our customers. So that's really been how we have tried to differentiate ourselves. And it's not easy to mass customize in a disaggregation process. Certainly much easier to mass standardize. And the other challenge with that is that the traditional Sawmilling supplier network is really focused on delivering to mass standardization production systems. And so we've had to develop our own systems and process and technology to be able to optimize the mass customization business model. But my view is that, Henry Ford established mass standardization and it was really successful in the industrial age, but the technology age is about mass customization and technology overlay on a variable production system to be able to deliver exactly what a customer wants when they want it, and where you minimize their waste rather than transfer your waste onto them. So that mindset has really driven us and has driven our growth and has enabled us, along with brand and customer experience and price competitiveness, to compete.
That's an extremely interesting mindset, actually. Very well said. So on the topic of export markets and competing with them, Russia, of course, was a major export market into some of your main markets, or maybe not. You only export 1% to China, but they're still the absolute leader in China. So with the sanctions on Russia and with the problems in Belarus and Ukraine, because a significant volume has disappeared from the market, have you noticed an increase in the number of inquiries or anything related to that since the war started in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging time, obviously, for both countries, but equally for supply chains. And yes, there's a lot of nervousness, and with that comes a need to respond in various areas. But the reality is, my first priority is to our customer base. And so we've got customers who have been with us for a long time. They're really important to us, and we've got to make sure first and foremost we fulfill their needs, and then we're open to other opportunities beyond that. But it's certainly going to have an effect, but I'm not sure how it's going to play out yet. It could be really burden. It could be a real problem for New Zealand manufacturers, or it could be a boon. I don't know. It really depends on how China responds.
Have you seen any indication yet if there are a higher number of inquiries and demand overall in the market?
Yes, we have in some market segments, but demand's been super strong anyway. Like from our perspective, demand. It's not just the Russia-Ukraine issue. It's equally the fact that the US has recaptured housing starts at 1.5 million, and that's just, a lot of people see that as a boon and it's just a moment in time, but it's not. That all I've done is return to average, and so that's their 50-year average. And so now you've got housing starts in the US that are now back at their average, but they've had 12 years where the housing starts has been poor, and so it's carved out manufacturing capability domestically. And so now you've got masses of opportunity for European and South American producers to supply into that market. And so it's just changing. That's changing the wood flows globally. We're just seeing a lot of movement in wood flows, and so that creates a lot of exciting opportunities.
I agree absolutely, and I believe. And we researched the trade flows and the markets pretty closely. And I believe there's going to be a significant shift of maybe not all, but many of the most established trade flows which we've seen. And there's going to be winners and losers, and many countries are going to change who are their leading key partners, actually, on both the export and the import side. But we're only 2 or 3 months into this situation. So it's going to take at least 1 or 2 years, if not more, for things to actually settle down and for the new normal to be visible, in my opinion.
Yeah, it will take time. yeah, it's just a sad way for obviously for it to all take shape. I just don't think it's just about Russia and Ukraine. I think that's definitely true, and it's going to affect European demand and where European flow sits. But I still believe that US demand recapturing its long-term average housing starts it gives a medium-term foundation to the demand that we're seeing. And I think if we just focus on these, COVID or Ukraine and Russia, these things could be finished tomorrow and it could all start up again, and things could move. But I think that what we're seeing in America is the bigger driver for global wood flows over the long term, because the housing starts back at average, creates a lot of opportunity for South American, European suppliers to take their high value products into that market, creates a vacuum in the IMENA and the Asian markets where they traditionally play with any surplus capacity.
Is New Zealand doing any millwork products or moldings going into North America?
Yes, yeah. So we supply customers who do that work.
Okay. And talking about global markets, and you touched on this briefly before, but how do you, let's say you're in a sales meeting and the whole world is asking for your timber. How do you divide which countries to work with? And also, you also mentioned that Thailand and Vietnam and Oman and North Africa are interesting, but are there any markets that are particularly interesting for you as well to enter?
So I guess our philosophy is that with mass customization, you take a portfolio theory, and the more diversified your rectangles, the more you can optimize your cylinders. So we don't really target market segments or markets as such. We really target geometric shape, and so wherever that is, and wherever we can compete, so we'll feed it into our optimizer to be able to deliver that outcome. But so that's at the sort of the micro level. At a macro level, I think when I think about what markets we want to be in, I take a longer term view, and I think about where I see the world in 10 years' time. And I do believe that the world's going to become increasingly more bifurcated, and there are markets that could no longer be open to us quite quickly. And so I don't see that settling down. And so we're really targeting markets where we think that there's a long-term opportunity to have a relationship and a low risk that the trade line will be impacted. So for me, I think, Southeast Asia, it's proximate, it's close, we've got good trade relationships. I think increasingly you'll see manufacturing move more and more there, not exclusive of China, but as well as. So the growth is going to come in those other markets. And so I'm really interested in being a part of that, particularly in the furniture space, engineered wood space. I think Africa over the very long term, its demographics support continuing growth, and I think being a part of that and learning what the customer is interested in that market is something that we want to do. And then we want to do stuff domestically. So we think that New Zealand itself will have a significant demand boost in timber as we move more towards low carbon construction.
Absolutely. And I think that furniture production, especially that is destined for Europe, will move a lot closer to Europe, because because also as the world gets more environmentally aware and wants to reduce carbon emissions, there's no use shipping cargo halfway around the world and then back again just to make a piece of furniture. And with that, I really believe that the Middle East, and especially North Africa, is a really strong place to be a manufacturing hub for Europe, because the population is super young. I believe the average age of the 300 million strong population is 25 or something.
Yeah, so under 30, that's right.
And their education, not many are highly educated. So this young population needs work, manual labor to do. And yes, because of the proximity to Europe, cheap logistics, extremely good relationships, I believe it really can become a very strong manufacturing hub indeed.
Yeah, I think the point you make around total cost of carbon is a really important one. And I think it's a real risk for New Zealand. So the last 20 years, our distance from the rest of the world has been decimated by technology, and technology has overcome any issues that distance creates. But now that we capture the total carbon cost of our products, it means that our ability to be able to look at substitutes for fossil fuels for our export products becomes more important probably than a lot of other countries, because there's no one close to us.
And on the topic of logistics, are you restricted in any way by the available routes, option, or costs in that way?
Yes, it's been a really difficult time for everyone with supply chain costs of. So basically, you cannot get a container to go to the Middle East from New Zealand at the moment. It's not impossible, but it's near on impossible. So we're finding our Asian routes are fine. North America routes, I know from some of my friends in the sawmilling industry, they're struggling. But so what we've done is we've just moved to chartering ships. So whilst the container flow has been really difficult, there's a significant availability of ships to charter what we see here. So we're chartering our own ship, and we're trying to collaborate broadly with New Zealand industry here, both within the wood products industry and more broadly. And so we're doing a 3-monthly vessel into the Middle East at the moment. So our 4th ship leaves in the next couple of days, and it will have stopping at 5 destinations. So it's going to Karachi, Oman, Dubai, and Dammam. So sorry, 4 destinations. And so we'll keep doing that, and we'll try and increase the intensity of it. So for us, moving to bulk vessels has been the answer, but it's certainly been difficult.
But I've worked a lot with bulk freight and also container, of course. But bulk is really a huge opportunity as well, because you're not restricted in the same way with weight restrictions or lengths or something. And you don't need to worry about truck bundles, which are, have 5-10 different lengths in the bundle. So in that way, it's also probably an opportunity for you guys.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it doesn't sit as naturally with our concept of just-in-time delivery, and you have to have a bulk shipment. We're not as fast, so it requires our customer to take stock. So if I was being honest, my preference is that we return to some semblance of normality, and that container flow would re-emerge. But it's certainly been an effective way for us to respond to the current issues, and it's ensuring that our customers get what they need. And that's our priority.
And I have one final question for you, David, before we enter Q&A, where the audience will be able to ask you questions directly. And my question to you is the following. You're a country far away. You work across many different time zones. You work with clients whose first language maybe isn't English. So how do you see that technology can add value to how global timber is exported and sold and managed?
So I think there used to be I'd say there's two answers to that. One, it's I think technology gives us the ability to interface with our customers and our customers into our production system. And I think that there enables you to transform the customer experience. And I see that as a really important opportunity to differentiate our business, but equally it gives us the ability to connect to our customers in a much more in a real-time way, and it enables us to connect to them in the way that they want us to, and we can design. So technology enables us to design how we're connecting to them, rather than our traditional show up every 6 months and take them out for dinner. So it enables you to enhance the frequency. It enables you to customize to that customer or to that persona, and I think that's really powerful. And I just think there's a whole lot of efficiencies that you can gain through that process. So there's a lot of waste through our supply chain. If we can eliminate the waste in terms of the connectivity between the production and the customer, I think that's good for everyone. So we're on a journey at the moment, and we were actively in the process of designing a technology system to be able to integrate both into our production system and into our customer, to connect with them in a different way. And fortunately, I bumped into you, Amir, and you might have already built the system for us. So it would be good to talk more about it.
I agree full-heartedly with your points, because I've personally managed in a good month 200 to 300 containers personally, and managing, and I've worked with Canada, Middle East, Asia, really all different time zones. And the problem today is that 30 to 50% of the time of a purchasing manager or sales export manager time goes to non-value adding tasks. And I've worked with many of the world's biggest sawmills, and essentially what I noticed quite early on is all of them have, regardless what part they're from and how many million cubic meters they produce, they all share the exact same inefficient processes. The production is hyper automated, and they make huge investments to increase the yield or log sorting capacity even 1%. But the biggest bottleneck and the biggest improvement to EBITDA and the bottom line doesn't come from making these costly investments that have downtime in production. It's actually to increase the efficiency and productivity of the export sales and logistics. That's the biggest bottleneck today.
Yeah, and if you can solve a customer's problem, then you'll make $5 a cube more than the market anyway, once you're connected into their system. So, and it's not all, our experience is, price is important, but there's lots of ways in which you can add value beyond price and product, and trying to articulate those and to deliver that to those is the lowest cost way that you can add margin into your business.
And it's also because, in my opinion, and I've had a lot of time to think about this, David, I promise. The customers, from the time that I send you the first inquiry, David, until that cargo arrives, could be 3-4 months if I'm unlucky.
Correct.
And because of that, because of production time, and we need to add it into the production plan, then produce it, kiln it, ship it, all that stuff. And during that time, there can easily be 100 emails. And then if something happens during that process, what's the tracking number? You didn't follow the shipping instructions, or what are the shipping instructions? Everything is spread out between WhatsApp, WeChat, emails, personal notes, things we said on the phone and we both forgot to write down. It's very hard for me as a client or as a seller to organize the customer experience in a single place, because it is so dispersed today. And that's really my vision when I started this company. And we're not a big company, but we're still 34 people, so we have a decent organization. But having all of that in one place allows the relation. Some people think that this technology means that you won't speak to your customer ever again. That's going to be further from the truth. It means that when you speak to the customer, you don't discuss non-value adding things like the tracking number or information that went missing. You can focus on discussing the actual business.
Yeah, I'm absolutely in agreement with you. So true. And I think the ability to differentiate on a non-product basis is really interesting as well. So one of the things that we've developed here, which is integrating. So you talk about the 4 months it takes to get the product. So you've had to raise an LC before you send that to get the product. So you've got working capital tied up there, and then you got stock, and then you've got your product and your accounts receivable. So, some of our customers in Vietnam, it takes them 6 months to get paid out of America. So we worked out they had like a year's working capital requirement within their factory needed just for the fiber. And so integrating into a business where you can deliver just in time, and you could build algorithms that look at their consumption rate and see their, and then your time to market, and then you can integrate that into your production scheduling with that. Just by looking at their consumption rate, you can, and then overlaying. So we've created some trade finance products which enable them to not have to pay us to be able to deliver to them. It's a point of difference that puts you deep inside that company. If you become important, yes, you have to meet the market price, but it's not about $5 anymore. The value you're creating is much more than that.
Exactly. It's about the combined solution. A
Yes.
really amazing forestry product, sawn timber, that is a company that's easy to work with and value-added services. So when you choose a supplier around the world, you know who to go to.
Yeah. So I am nodding my head off at your concept, Amir.
And we'll be moving into the Q&A. So please ask your questions at the bottom in the Q&A box. Do not ask it, please, in the chat. It will not be allowed in the chat. But until the questions start coming in, I'd like to make a small, quick announcement. So in Timber Exchange now, we have added a professional services division where our in-house experts will manage different parts of the supply chain for you. The three latest ones are cargo inspection, where we will go and inspect cargo on your behalf and issue a comprehensive report for you, checking the quality, the tolerance, and all different product-related parameters. The second one, this is especially important maybe during summer holidays or Christmas holidays for some companies, a document review service to ensure that it's compliant with both the contract and also the regulations of the importing country. And the third service, which we're launching now, is a letter of credit remittance and management, where we will be the beneficiary and the shipper, with a beneficiary on the letter of credit and the shipper on the BL, and we will be managing it all on your behalf for a very nominal, small fixed fee, including of drafting of all the shipping documents. And if you liked this episode, please know that there are weekly episodes, and we do both webinars and podcast episodes that are audio only. And you should be getting emails about these, but these episodes are also available on Spotify. And here on the screen, you can see some of our previous episodes. We really do love to interview market leaders from all around the world. And with that said, let's move into the Q&A. Let's see what questions we've got for you, David.
So, no, we can't do SPF, sorry. Only radiata pine. It's the first one.
The second question, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that name correctly, my apologies, is can we have grading rules of New Zealand and its specifications?
Yes.
Is there an organization, David, where they can find the standard grading rules of New Zealand? Like a Sawmilling Association or something?
Yeah.
Or maybe
so,
on your website?
On our website, if you go to our website, you'll get a list of our grades and its specifications. So SEQUAL.nz, SEQUAL.nz. And also Scion is our Crown Research Institute, which has just a rich history of research in terms of radiata pine. So you can get everything you could ever conceive of from them. So that's Scion, SCION, New Zealand.
The next question is from George. Do you export structural lumber KDHD as far as 2x4 to the US market? If yes, what volume do you produce and do you have a grade stamp?
So we don't, sorry, George, we don't do anything directly into North America yet. So we're really focused on IMENA in Asia. And we're not doing, at this stage, we're not doing any structural framing. We focus on furniture, packaging, and reman construction markets. The
next question is from Alex. Why did you say that framing timber from New Zealand cannot be sold in Australia? Say, for instance, 9045 and MGP 10.
Yeah, so that MGP 10 is the problem for New Zealand. We can't produce enough of it to deliver in volume. Majority of our grade stress, we have stress grade 8. And so the standards in Australia don't allow us to sell SG8 into the framing market. So that's been the challenge. And that's why 30% of Australian imports come from Europe, not from New Zealand. If that rule was to change, if they lowered the stiffness requirement, because we know that SG8's fit for purpose, then that would be a tremendous opportunity for Australia and New Zealand, because It would mean that Australia would be able to reduce their costs of framing, but equally it would mean that you wouldn't have to import it from such a distance, and the carbon impact of that importation would be significantly reduced. So it's certainly something that I think New Zealand and Australia should be looking to cooperate on.
The next question is from Abdulila. Hello, Abdel, good to see you. And his question reads, how do you see the forecast for the global market? Are prices increasing or decreasing in your opinion?
That's a good question. I forecast that it's going to be extremely volatile is my forecast. I think generally the trend for timber prices, we've had significant increases. I see them stabilizing here for some time, but I think there's going to be significant volatility as central banks globally tighten. That'll have a global economic effect. We've got the issue with supply shortages driven through Russia and Ukraine. We've got and how China responds to that in terms of its log demand is going to be interesting. So at the moment, demand for logs in China is quite low. The prices are coming off, but prices are historically high, as are shipping prices. How are Russia and China going to partner going forward around fiber? Is the log ban that Russia imposed in 2022 going to be sustained, or will they move away from that to be able to generate income? So there's just so much uncertainty that I feel like the risk is that right now the risk is to the downside in terms of the global growth, and I think that generally when global growth comes off, we should see log supply drop, and we should see an easing in the price increases that we're seeing in timber.
And we have one question from Joe or Joss, not sure how to pronounce that name. Kebony and Assis are buying a lot of clears from New Zealand. They want to have a lot more. How do you see the future of them in New Zealand?
Yeah, so we love Kebony and Akoya. The problem that we have is the reduction in prune log availability. So there's underinvestment in that milling infrastructure to be able to deliver that in volume. And that's just driven purely through log price distortions. So the forest owner can get so much money selling a utility grade log to China that there's no incentive for them to prune logs anymore, because a prune log is not exportable. So its price doesn't move as aggressively as the utility grade log. You can't export a prune log because the benefits of pruned are lost when you send it overseas, because the log deteriorates and it gets sap stain. So you lose that clear benefit. So I think that the chemical hardening and the modified wood markets, thermal modification, there's a company in New Zealand called Abodo, which does an amazing job of turning thermally modified pine into beautiful finished wood products. And the biggest risk for us is we just can't get enough volume of that prune wood to be able to build a global brand. So, and it's driven purely by distortions. That's the only reason why this issue exists. So we need to, we are talking about how we can get around this issue, but I think time's running out, because the major forestry guys have stopped pruning for some time now. And the availability of prune logs over the next few years is just going to increase, is going to diminish.
And that seems to be all the questions for, now there's one final question. Customers are willing to pay extra for pruning, but has that money ended up with the forest owners, or does it stay with the sawmills?
That's a good question. Yes, they are prepared to pay more for pruning. And I think the money is sat, this is my personal view, that the sawmills have probably captured a significant share of that, and the forest owner is more than happy to prune, but the price point is at a much higher rate, which the sawmills haven't been prepared to pay. I think there were solutions. The solutions are that the sawmills should be investing in the pruning themselves to guarantee them supply. There's lots of ways we could have got around it, but as of today, we haven't. So it represents a significant potential loss of an opportunity. And I think we will regret it because it's a clear differentiator. So you can see behind me, this is thermally modified wood that we were trialing of radiator pine, but because I cut a knotty grade, we just couldn't get the consistency. When you cut a thermally modified clear or a Kibbeney clear, it just looks beautiful. And but you really need that clear wood to be able to grow that market.
David, thank you so much sincerely for your time today, and thank you for sharing your insights and helping us to get to know the New Zealand timber market, helping us to get to know SEQUAL and what the future holds. Thank you so much indeed.
Thanks, Amir.
And thank you to the audience, absolutely, for attending today. And please know that there are going to be there are weekly episodes. Next week's episode is on the Russia-Ukraine crisis and how it will affect established trade flows in the industry. The week after, we're interviewing an Egyptian importer to see how that market is doing. And after that, we're interviewing Mr. Tommy Snack, the president of the Finnish Sawmill Association. So we're becoming a little bit of a TV channel here, but we really, really love it. And here on the screen now, you should be able to see SEQUAL's website and my own personal details. And I know on SEQUAL's website, they have a contact us form as well. To everyone and to you, David, thank you very much for attending today. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.